cousin in Moose Jaw,
Oh, Julia.
Julia. How was she related?
Her mother was a Glatz, and she was Julia Glatz, and her mother was Grandpa's second cousin.
Okay.
And we visited them in Carmichael, Saskatchewan, which his cousin then moved to Winnipeg when he retired from the farm. But I was a little kid, and Carmichael is just a small town, a prairie town, but there was a big silos for wheat and grain, and that was it. And then in 1969, your Aunt Carol and I took the three boys and had a motorhome that we were delivering to a friend in Anchorage, Alaska, and we stopped in Carmichael, and I was wearing those trousers that came right below the knee. I don't remember what they call them, and then I had
a German.
Yeah, and then I had a handlebar mustache, and I was wearing kind of a Greek fisherman's cap. And we pulled into Carmichael, and there was a bunch of vehicles parked in front of a building. So I drove down there, and I went in, and there was a bunch of guys sitting around a table drinking Canadian rye whiskey. And I came in, and they all stopped talking and looked at me, and they said, they said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes. Do any of you gentlemen know a man named John Cresco who lives around here?" And one of the guys, who must apparently be the chairman, said, "Oh, he died yesterday, but his remains are sitting right there in that chair." The guy wasn't dead; he was alive. This was Cousin John, and he's a farmer. And any rate, this was the township board, and what they were discussing is what they were going to do because of frost, a heavy late June frost, mid-June frost, had killed their main crop, which was flax. And John's wife had taken the pickup truck and gone to Swift Current, the nearest big city, to get several sack loads of flax seed to replant. And so came out of the meeting. We got in the motorhome and drove up across a valley, up some hills, some dirt roads to his farm, about 12 miles out of town. And nice farm place, and he had about 300 head of cattle and 3,600 acres.
Wow.
And grew mostly wheat and flax. Anyway, his wife got home quite late, but in the meantime, he found his charcoal grill in his barn and got it out, but he couldn't find the grate for it, the top.
Uh-huh.
And John and I and his uncle, an old guy from Winnipeg that was helping on the farm, retired railroad guy, we'd been drinking whiskey and water and some beer, and we were pretty well lit, and couldn't find the grate for the charcoal grill, so he went in the house, emptied a shelf of the refrigerator, and brought that refrigerator shelf out and torched it and put it on the grill and fried steaks from one of their own cows. And anyway, then his wife came home and met her, and they had two sons. One of them was nice. They were both really nice kids, but the older one had been in a truck accident and had some brain damage, and he was working on the farm, but his short-term memory was
Okay.
gone. And his dad would say, ask him to John Jr., John, go out the barn and do something. And by the time he got to the barn, he'd forgotten what he was told to do, so he just did everything over and over again.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, that was a sad situation. But anyway, we had a great steak dinner, and then in June in southern Canada, it was daylight a long time. The longest day of the year is in June, and well, we slept in our motorhome, me and your Aunt Carol and your cousins. And the next morning, we're getting ready to leave. John's wife, can't remember her name, came out and filled the freezer in that motorhome with meat from their freezer. With steaks and chops and hamburger, and it was just marvelous. And then we headed up the Alcan Highway for Alaska. And, well, we went west on Canada Highway 1 to Swift Current, and then to Lethbridge, and then to Calgary and Edmonton, and then up the Alcan Highway. This is a 28-foot motorhome called a McCoy, made in Indianola, Iowa. It was a 1969 model, and the total price at the factory was $8,000. It was built on a Ford chassis, Ford gas engine, and it had Humphrey lights, gas lights, and propane, and no air conditioning or no generator, but it was bare bones. And my friend Corny Feenstra was in Alaska and managing a mobile home factory, and he had paid for it, and I was delivering it to him with Alaska licensed dealer plates, and got a broken windshield on the way, two of them. Had one replaced in Moose Jaw, and then another one got broken on the way up the road. And we got to Anchorage and didn't have a time to wash that motorhome or anything. It was covered with dirt. And Corny sold it to some guy for $13,000, and you paid $8,000.
Wow.
And
you got a trip out of it.
You got a trip out of it. I kind of figured he should pay me the $300 in gas I paid, but he didn't. But we had a nice vacation, and we were there. We were gone from Worthington, at least over 3 weeks. But I did on telephone. I didn't have cell phones then, but at various stops, I'd get a telephone. I'd phone back my daily perspective about what was happening in Alaska, and somewhere in the Yukon Territory, we stopped at a provincial park on a lake, and we all went swimming. Nice warm water in the lake, and then we stopped at a place called Liard Hot Springs, and there the water temperature was about over 100 degrees.
Oh, wow.
And we bathed in that. Well, years later, I read a news article about Liard Hot Springs, where a black bear, was attacking a woman in the spring, and a guy there grabbed a twig or stick or something and started beating on the bear, and the bear turned on him and killed him, and killed one more person before it was shot. And so I'm glad that never happened to us. But anyway, it was quite a trip, and then I've been to Alaska several times since, because in my broadcast business, I became a consultant to the Alaska Broadcasters Association on engineering inspection.
Okay.
And then your Aunt Carol and I actually led tours to Alaska too. So we get to go free, and
I think Grandma Burton went with one.
Grandma Burton.
Yeah.
Oh, this is another story.
Because she went to, on
Grandma
the,
Burton and her friend. I can't remember her friend's name,
yeah.
but another nice, wealthy old lady. She came. This was a trip to the Maritime Provinces of Canada,
Uh-huh.
and the Grandma Burton and this lady friend of hers like to have a cocktail before dinner, just like I do.
Uh-huh.
And we had booked passes. The leisure tourist company that I did business with had reserved rooms at this Pacific Motel in Moncton, New Brunswick. And well, we walked into the bar and restaurant, and there was a sign, happy hour, 4 to 6 p.m. It was 5. And we ordered drinks. Well, the waitress brought us each one drink. When we got the bill, we were charged for 2 drinks. And I called her over and I said, what the heck kind of happy hour was this? And she said, true story, she said, it makes the owner happy. And so you buy 1 drink and you pay for 2. That's happy hour.
Oh, that's funny.
Needless to say, we never went back to that place.
Yeah.
But
Grandma Burton had a thing on the wall that was going over the Arctic Circle. I think one of the trips she went on.
Yep.
And all with you.
Yes.
And they flew over it or something.
Yep. Yes. They took a side trip and actually went to Point Barrow, Alaska.
Okay.
And on a plane trip. Yes.
Yeah.
And then on one of our trips, we took the train. The train doesn't run all the way anymore, but it used to run from Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, went down through the mountains, and this is a grade, about a 4.5% grade train track. That's steep. Went down through the mountains, down to Skagway, Alaska. Well, we had reservations at the West Wind Hotel in Skagway. Well, in Anchorage, week before, leisure tours person got a hold of me and said, we lost the rooms in Skagway because West Tours does the same thing we do, and they took our rooms for one of their tours. So I said, what are we going to do? She said, don't worry about it. We got your book passage at the Halsingland Hotel at that Fort, the old Fort Wainwright or whatever, Fort something. And it was the old officers club at this Fort Seward, Alaska. And well, how do we get there? Well, we chartered 6 Cherokee 6 aircraft to fly you from Skagway to Haines, and it was only a 20-minute flight across the Gulf of Alaska, and we had one man who was a retired elevator operator from Worthington, and his wife, and he was recovering from a stroke, and he said, Jim, you better put May and me on the same plane, because if something happens, I can't tie my shoes myself. Anyway, then I had 2 ladies on that trip, one from Mountain Lake, Minnesota, and her sister from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they were scared to death of getting on a small plane. Never been on one. And I sent your Aunt Carol, and she went in the first plane to welcome the people when they got to the airport in Haines. Uh-huh. And I'm on the last plane with these 2 ladies, and to reassure them everything's all right. And so the pilot of this plane was a young man, and I'm trying to set these women at ease. And I say to this guy, so you are an Alaskan bush pilot? He said, yes, sir, I am. Well, how long have you been in Alaskan bush? 3 months now. Where are you from? Florida. Oh, anyway, and we got across, but the airport at Skagway, Alaska is on a runway between two mountain ranges. And I'm sitting there watching the planes take off. They go roaring down the runway, and boy, in that valley is loud. And they go off the end of the runway and they disappear like they're going off an aircraft carrier. And then they come up.
Wow.
And some exciting times. And then if you ever get to Anchorage, Fairbanks, Alaska, Bill, there's one thing you got to do. You got to take in the Fairbanks salmon bake. They have whole salmon sliced in half, and they do them over charcoal, and boy, really something. Anyway, on one of our trips, we were coming on a bus out of Valdez, heading toward somewhere, and one of the guys on our trip was a implement dealer from Worthington named John Vandergrift, and he was a hunter and a trapper and a woodsman and fisherman. And there's a mountain stream coming out of the mountains, going in the valley, and our bus pulled over to the side of the road, and John and I got out, and when everybody got out to look at the salmon in the creek, John goes down. He's got just engineer boots on. He steps out in the middle of the river and starts catching salmon by hand and holding them up. We got pictures someplace of him with hand-caught salmon. Anyway, then we were on an estuary of a river, and they were dead. This is where the salmon actually, where they actually, where they dropped their eggs and then they died. And the bottom of that little estuary, there were just all hundreds of dead salmon. And I was wondering where the bears are supposed to eat them, and the tour guide said, well, they'll be along. And I digressed from our original discussion about Grandpa Wycor and Grandma.
That's okay.
And
I should probably stop it and make sure that I save that file off.
yeah.